In a narrow alley where the walls of small houses leaned into each other, life moved slowly yet heavily. The lane was so tight that only a single motorbike could pass at a time. Most of the homes were built with raw brick, unplastered, their red surfaces cracked and weather-worn. Among these cramped dwellings stood one particular house, barely large enough to hold a small living room, a modest kitchen, and a single bedroom where Ali lived with his mother, Bibi Hajra. Ali, a young man of 24, carried himself with quiet strength. His broad shoulders and well-defined features made him stand out in the neighborhood, often drawing admiring glances. But his eyes betrayed a depth of fatigue and a weight far heavier than his age should have allowed. His father had passed away years ago after a long illness, leaving Ali as the only support for his mother. Since then, life had been nothing but survival, each day beginning before dawn and ending late into the night. He worked at a garment factory where he sewed uniforms and work clothes for endless hours. Each morning, he would wake while it was still dark, put on his worn-out clothes, and take the long ride to the factory. By the time he returned, sweat and dust clung to him, but he rarely complained. His only concern was that his mother should not go to bed hungry. Bibi Hajra, though approaching 50, remained sturdy in appearance. Her hands were rough and calloused from years of hauling baskets of vegetables that she sold in the local market. The deep lines on her face told the story of hardship, lines carved not only by the heat of the sun but by years of sleepless nights and silent worries. Her biggest burden was not the labor of her work but the crushing weight of debt. Years ago, when her husband had fallen gravely ill, she had borrowed a large sum from Mirza Akram, a wealthy trader known for his sharp dealings. Her husband did not survive, and the debt only grew larger with time. One evening, when Ali returned from work, he removed his dusty shoes at the door and stepped inside. On the table, there was only a plate of stale rice and a few remnants of fried spinach. The house felt eerily quiet. He found his mother sitting on a plastic chair in the dimly lit living room, her eyes fixed on a crumpled bill in her hand. "Amma, why didn't you cook something fresh?" Ali asked gently, placing his small work bag on the table. Bibi Hajra lifted her face, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Her voice trembled as she replied, "I had no money left to buy groceries, my son." Ali's heart tightened. This wasn't the first time he had heard such words, but something in his mother's face that evening was different. There was a heaviness, a shadow of a problem greater than just an empty kitchen. "Tell me the truth, Amma," he pressed softly. "What's troubling you?" She hesitated, her lips quivering as though the words themselves were too heavy to release. Finally, with a deep sigh, she said, "Mirza Akram came today. He gave me an ultimatum. If we cannot pay the debt this month, he will take another step, but he offered me a solution." Ali leaned forward, dread rising within him. "What solution?" Her eyes lowered, guilt clouding her expression. "He said if you marry his daughter, our debt will be erased." Ali froze. His chest tightened as though struck by lightning. Marriage? To a woman he had never met? It felt less like a solution and more like selling his freedom. Ali's hands trembled as he let the crumpled bill slip from his grip, falling soundlessly to the floor. His voice came out hoarse, almost breaking. "Marriage? To whom?" Bibi Hajra swallowed hard, her eyes unable to meet her son's. "Her name is Fatima, Mirza Akram's only daughter. She has been confined to a wheelchair since an accident years ago." Her words faltered as though they carried the weight of chains. "He said she is kind, beautiful in her own way, but paralyzed. If you agree, he will forgive everything we owe." Ali's mind spun. The air around him suddenly felt suffocating. He had lived his life under hardship, but never imagined his future being dictated by a transaction. "Amma," he said with disbelief, "how can you ask me to marry someone I don't love?" "Someone I don't even know?" Tears slid down Hajra's tired face. "Do you think I want this for you?" "My son, I have no choice. If we fail to pay, he will take away our house, everything we have. I cannot bear to see you broken and wandering the streets with nothing. At least this way, your future will be secure." Ali fell silent. He knew his mother was right. The debt was a noose tightening around their lives. Yet the thought of marrying a stranger, and a paralyzed one at that, filled him with dread. He rose from the chair, pacing the small room restlessly. His heart was heavy with conflict, his sense of duty clashing with his yearning for freedom. That night, he lay on the thin mattress in their narrow bedroom, staring at the cracked ceiling. Sleep refused to come. His mother's words echoed endlessly in his head. He pictured the life that awaited him, caring for a woman he did not know, bound, not by love but by obligation. Could he live like that? Could he endure the whispers of neighbors who would call it a marriage bought by debt? But then he looked at his mother lying on the other side of the room, her face lined with fatigue even in sleep, and his heart softened. She had sacrificed everything for him. Could he not sacrifice once for her? The next morning, after dawn prayers, Ali sat with his mother at the rickety wooden table. His eyes were swollen from a sleepless night, but his tone was calm, resolved. Amma, I will do it. If this is what it takes to protect you, I will marry her. Bibi Hadra's eyes filled instantly with tears. She clasped her son's hands tightly, her rough palms pressing against his. May Allah bless you, my child. I know this is not easy, but He will surely reward your sacrifice. Preparations for the wedding began within days, but it was nothing like the joyous ceremonies Ali had witnessed in his neighborhood. There were no strings of lights, no melodies of laughter, no festivity in the air. Everything was rushed, silent, and heavy. Mirza Akram himself made all the arrangements, treating it more like a business deal than a sacred bond. On the day of the wedding, Ali stood before a cracked mirror in his small room. He wore his late father's old suit, its color faded, the fabric tight across his strong frame. His eyes looked lifeless, resigned to a fate he had not chosen. At the doorway, his mother whispered, voice trembling yet filled with desperate hope, "Forgive me, Ali." I had no other way, Ali forced a faint smile. It's all right, Amma. May Allah guide us. While Ali prepared himself in his modest home, far away in a sprawling mansion, Fatima sat silently before a large mirror. Her delicate face was framed by a pale blue bridal dress embroidered with silver threads, her hair carefully pinned into a neat bun. A makeup artist applied soft tones to her features, while her mother, Begum Naila, adjusted the dupatta draped over her head. Yet despite the effort to make her look radiant, Fatima's eyes remained distant, carrying a sadness that beauty could not conceal. She turned to her mother, her voice low but steady. Ami, why must this happen? I do not know him. I do not want to marry someone who pities me. Begum Naila sighed deeply, pressing her daughter's hands. My dear, your father has decided. He believes this is best. You know how society looks at us. If you remain unmarried, people will talk. They will call you a burden. But I am not a burden, Fatima whispered fiercely, tears brimming in her eyes. I can live my life without being forced into this. Her mother's face softened with compassion, but she shook her head helplessly. Your father is a man of pride. His word cannot be undone. Please, my child, endure this. Perhaps Allah has written something good for you in this path. Meanwhile, Ali arrived at the small hall chosen for the nikah. It was a plain building, usually used for community gatherings. Plastic chairs were arranged in rows, maroon fabric draped over the walls in an attempt to create a festive atmosphere. A simple stage held 2 wooden chairs covered in gold cloth, more symbolic than celebratory. The ceremony was brief. A handful of relatives, neighbors, and acquaintances filled the chairs, whispering among themselves. Some pitied Ali, believing he had sacrificed his youth for wealth. Others envied him, assuming he would now live a life of ease. Few understood the weight on his heart. Ali sat stiffly as the imam recited the nikah. His responses were firm, yet his voice carried no joy. Across from him, Fatima kept her gaze lowered, her hands trembling in her lap. She too repeated the words with resignation rather than celebration. The moment the imam declared them husband and wife, scattered congratulations filled the room, smiles were forced, handshakes brief. It felt less like a wedding and more like a transaction completed. When the gathering ended, Ali and Fatima left together for the apartment that Mirza Akram had arranged for them. It was far smaller than her family home, but larger than what Ali was used to. For Fatima, it was confining. For Ali, it was foreign. As they entered the apartment, Ali helped wheel Fatima inside. The silence between them was suffocating. He placed their bags on the sofa and glanced at her nervously. "Are you tired?" he asked softly. Fatima shook her head, her tone cold. "No." "Maybe you are." Ali lowered his gaze, swallowing the bitterness of her words. He understood. They were strangers forced into the same cage, both resenting the circumstances that bound them. That night, their new home remained quiet. No laughter, no warmth, only the echo of two souls imprisoned by the choices of others. Yet neither knew that beneath the bitterness lay a truth hidden in shadows, waiting to surface and change everything. The first night in their new home passed in heavy silence. The ticking of the wall clock echoed in the small apartment, each second sounding louder than the last. Ali sat on the sofa, scrolling through his phone without truly reading anything. Fatima remained by the window in her wheelchair, staring at the darkness outside as though searching for an escape. Hours went by without words exchanged. At last, Fatima broke the silence, her voice soft but carrying an edge of weariness. "I need to go to the bathroom." Ali stood quickly, almost relieved to have a reason to move. "Should I help you?" he asked, though the words came out more as an obligation than kindness. Fatima gave a brief nod. He pushed her wheelchair to the bathroom door. Just before entering, she said quietly, "Leave me here." "I can manage for a while." Ali hesitated, then stepped back. He returned to the sofa, running his hands across his face, exhaustion pressing down on him. But within minutes, he heard something that froze him in place. Footsteps. Clear, steady footsteps striking against the tiled floor. His heart raced. Slowly, the bathroom door opened and Fatima appeared. She wasn't in her wheelchair. She wasn't struggling to walk. She was standing tall, her steps firm, her movements flawless. Ali's breath caught in his throat, his voice cracked with disbelief. "What? What is this? How are you walking?" Fatima's face paled, her lips trembling. She took a few hesitant steps toward him before lowering her gaze. I'm not paralyzed." The confession left her lips like a whisper of shame. Ali's hands clenched into fists. "Not paralyzed? All these years, everyone believed you were confined to that chair. Even I." He stopped, rage and confusion colliding within him. "Do you know what I have sacrificed? Thinking I was marrying someone who needed me? And now you tell me this was all an act?" Tears welled in Fatima's eyes. "You don't understand. I was forced. My father wanted me married off, and I couldn't bear the thought of men chasing after me for money. So I pretended. The wheelchair was my shield. If people thought I was paralyzed, they would leave me alone. But my father grew impatient. He threatened me. He said if I didn't marry, he would ruin my life." I had no choice. Ali turned away, his chest heaving with anger. He felt betrayed, humiliated, yet beneath the fury there was a flicker of recognition. He too had been forced into this marriage against his will. Was she, like him, a victim of her father's iron control? His voice softened slightly, though bitterness still lingered. "Why didn't you tell me earlier? Why keep me in the dark?" Fatima's tears spilled freely. "Because I was afraid. Afraid you wouldn't believe me. Afraid you would tell my father. Afraid of losing even the little freedom I had." Ali stared at her, torn between outrage and sympathy. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken truths. Finally, he said, "If we are to live like this, there can be no more lies. Whatever else happens, you must be honest with me." Fatima nodded quickly, her voice trembling. "I promise. No more lies." That night, for the first time, they sat together as husband and wife, not bound by pity or deceit, but by a fragile thread of truth. The revelation changed everything. The walls of silence that had caged them for days began to crack. That night, after Fatima's confession, both sat quietly on the sofa, uncertain where to begin. The television flickered in the background, its light dancing across their faces, but neither paid attention. At last, Ali spoke, his voice steady though his heart was still unsettled. "Tell me the truth, Fatima. Why did you feel hiding behind a wheelchair was your only option? She looked at him, her eyes glistening. Because I was never seen as a person. To my father, I was his only child, a jewel he wanted to protect but also control. To others, I was a prize, his wealth wrapped in a human form. No one wanted me for who I was. They wanted what came with me. I thought if I appeared weak, men would stay away. And for years it worked. But it also made me a prisoner. Ali listened, his anger slowly giving way to empathy. He thought of his own life, his youth buried under the burden of poverty, his mother's endless sacrifices, the crushing debt that had turned his freedom into currency. In that moment, he realized they weren't enemies. They were both captives of circumstances neither had chosen. My father died struggling, Ali said after a pause, his gaze fixed on the floor. He left us with nothing but debt. My mother has carried that weight for years. I married you not out of choice, but to save her from humiliation. You think you are alone in being forced, but I too was trapped. Fatima's lips quivered. So we are both victims. Yes, Ali said softly. But victims can still choose what happens next. We can either resent each other or try to build something from this mess. For the first time since their marriage, Fatima's expression softened. She nodded slowly. You're right. I don't want to keep living in anger. If we must share this life, let it not be filled with lies and hatred. From that night, a fragile understanding began to grow. Ali started returning from work not just with exhaustion, but with a sense of responsibility beyond duty. In the evenings, he sat with Fatima at the dining table and they would talk, sometimes about faith, sometimes about life, and sometimes about their fears. One evening, Ali brought a small religious book his mother had given him. Fatima picked it up curiously. I never really studied these things, she admitted. Maybe that's what I've been missing. Direction, Ali was surprised but agreed to guide her. Slowly, their evenings turned into sessions of reflection. Ali explained simple concepts of prayer, patience, and gratitude, while Fatima listened attentively, jotting notes in a small notebook. These discussions gave them both something they had long been denied, peace of heart. Yet beyond their home, whispers still followed them. Neighbors called Ali a man who had sold himself to wealth, and some pitied Fatima for being forced into such a union. But inside their modest apartment, a seed of trust was being planted. Neither knew where it would lead, but both were willing, at last, to nurture it. Days passed, and the atmosphere in their small home began to shift. Where silence once lingered like a curse, now soft conversations filled the evenings. Ali would return from long hours of factory work, his shoulders aching, but instead of retreating into quiet despair, he found Fatima waiting for him with questions, reflections, or simply a desire to talk. The bitterness that once clouded their union was slowly lifting. Fatima, who had spent most of her life surrounded by luxury and servants, began to confront a world she had never known. In her family home, everything had been provided. Meals appeared on the table, clothes were pressed and folded, and chores were invisible burdens carried by others. But here, in this modest apartment, there was no one to cook, clean, or shop for her. At first, she felt lost. Yet instead of surrendering to helplessness, she decided to try. One afternoon, Ali returned home earlier than usual. The smell of something unfamiliar greeted him as he stepped inside. He found Fatima in the kitchen, her dupatta tied loosely around her shoulders, her delicate hands fumbling with vegetables on the counter. A large pot simmered on the stove, steam rising into the cramped room. "What's all this?" Ali asked, surprised, setting down his work bag. Fatima looked up shyly, a smear of flour on her cheek. "I thought I should try cooking. It may not be perfect, but I wanted to do something myself." Ali raised his brows, both amused and impressed. He had never imagined her, the daughter of a wealthy man, standing over a pot of broth in a tiny kitchen. "Are you sure it's edible?" he teased gently. She gave a nervous laugh. "You'll find out soon enough." That evening, they sat together at the small dining table. Fatima placed bowls of soup in front of them. The taste was far from flawless, too much salt, the chicken slightly undercooked, but Ali ate with genuine appreciation. "It's good," he said, smiling. "Not because it's perfect." but because you tried. Fatima lowered her gaze, her lips curving into a faint smile. For the first time in years, she felt proud of herself, not because of wealth, appearance, or her father's influence, but because of her own effort. As days turned into weeks, Fatima pushed herself further. She began shopping for groceries in the nearby market, walking alongside women she once would have overlooked. She learned how to budget their small income, how to clean, and even how to sew simple clothes. Each step made her feel freer, more independent, and less like the puppet of her father's will. Ali noticed the change. One evening, as he watched her kneeling on the floor, carefully mending a tear in his shirt, he said softly, "You've become stronger than I ever imagined. You're not the woman people pity. You're far more than that." Her cheeks flushed. "I only wanted to prove I am not a burden." Ali reached across the table, placing his hand gently on hers. "You were never a burden, Fatima. You just needed someone to remind you of your worth." In that moment, both realized that their marriage, born from force and deception, was slowly transforming into something deeper, a partnership built on effort, resilience, and the beginnings of trust. Though their home was beginning to bloom with trust, the world outside was not so kind. Whispers drifted through the neighborhood like smoke, seeping into every corner. Some neighbors muttered that Ali had married only for money, branding him an opportunist who had traded his freedom for comfort. Others pitied Fatima, saying she had been thrown into the hands of a poor man who could never provide the life she was used to. Ali tried to ignore the gossip, but he couldn't always shield Fatima from hearing it. Sometimes when she visited the market to buy vegetables, she would notice women exchanging glances, their whispers rising just loud enough to sting. "That's her, the rich man's daughter who married the factory worker," they would say. Though she kept her head bowed and pretended not to hear, the words cut into her heart. One evening, Ali returned home to find Fatima sitting silently at the table, her eyes red as if she had been crying. "What happened?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then spoke in a trembling voice. "Do they all think I married beneath me? Do they believe you trapped me?" Ali clenched his jaw, anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. He knelt beside her and took her hands. "Let them say what they want. We know the truth, and only Allah knows what is in our hearts. Their words cannot define us." Fatima nodded slowly, comforted by his firmness. But both of them knew that gossip wasn't their only problem. Far away, her father, Mirza Akram, had begun to suspect that something was amiss. Fatima had stopped visiting him. His prideful nature could not accept her silence. Rumors reached his ears that she no longer used a wheelchair. One morning, as Ali prepared to leave for work, his phone rang. The name on the screen made his stomach twist. "Bibi Hadra." He answered quickly. "Ali, come home at once." His mother's voice trembled. "Mirza Akram came to the market today." He shouted before everyone, saying, "Fatima has been pretending all along. He blamed you. He said you've influenced her." Ali felt his chest tighten. He turned to Fatima, who stood pale, listening. "We need to face him," he said firmly. Later that day, they arrived at Hajra's small stall. A crowd had gathered. In the middle stood Mirza Akram, his face red with fury, his booming voice echoing across the market. "So it's true," he thundered, pointing at Ali. "You turned my daughter against me. You destroyed her honor, and now she defies me." Ali walked forward calmly, though his fists clenched. "I did nothing but respect her." She found the courage to live honestly. "Is that what angers you?" The crowd fell into a tense silence. Some nodded at Ali's words. Others murmured in fear of Akram's power. Fatima wheeled forward, then stood slowly, shocking many who had only known her as paralyzed. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "I am not weak," she said, her voice firm, though her hands trembled. "I chose to live in truth." "If you cannot accept that, Father, it is not my shame, it is yours." The market froze. For the first time, Ali and Fatima stood together, facing both the cruelty of gossip and the wrath of a father who had never allowed his daughter to breathe freely. The confrontation at the market left ripples that refused to fade. Neighbors continued to whisper, some admiring Fatima's courage, others condemning her for defying her father so openly. But in her heart, Fatima felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in her life, she had spoken her truth. That evening, their home was quiet. Ali sat on the sofa, his head lowered, while Fatima stood by the window. The air between them was thick with unspoken thoughts. Finally, she turned to him, her eyes resolute. "I can't keep living like this," she said firmly. "We have to face him properly. I must go to my father and tell him everything myself. If I stay silent, he'll never stop chasing us." Ali looked at her with concern. "Are you sure, Fatima?" "He's not a man who listens easily. You know his pride. He may say words that will hurt you deeply." "I'm not afraid anymore," she replied, her voice trembling but unwavering. "I have lived as a prisoner of his decisions for too long. I need to be free, even if it costs me his love." The next day, they prepared for the meeting. Fatima wore a simple outfit, her dupatta draped neatly over her head. Ali accompanied her, his presence steady, his expression calm but watchful. Together, they stepped into the grand home she had once lived in, a place filled with chandeliers, polished floors, and walls that gleamed with wealth, but felt colder than any prison. In the drawing room sat Mirza Akram, his expression stern, his eyes sharp with suppressed anger. Beside him, Begum Naila shifted uneasily, her face heavy with worry. Servants lingered in the corners, watching quietly. "You dare come here after humiliating me in front of everyone?" Mirza Akram's voice thundered, shaking the room. His glare shifted to Ali. "And you? I should have known better than to let a poor man into my family." "You've poisoned her mind." Fatima stepped forward before Ali could respond. Her voice was steady. "No, father. Ali has done nothing but respect me. It was I who lied about my condition, not him. I pretended to be paralyzed because I was tired of being treated as a trophy, not as a human being." Mirza Akram's face flushed with fury. "You, my own daughter, lied to me? To all of us?" Fatima's eyes filled with tears, but she did not waver. "Yes, I lied. But can you not see why? I wanted freedom. I wanted to be valued for who I am, not for what wealth surrounds me. I am your daughter, not your reputation." For a long moment, silence gripped the room. Begum Naila finally spoke, her voice soft, almost pleading. "She is right, Akram. We cannot force her to live behind lies. She is grown. She has chosen her path." Mirza Akram's fists clenched, his breathing heavy. Pride battled with the love he buried deep within. At last his voice broke, trembling with restrained pain. "If this is your choice, then so be it. But remember, Fatima, you are no longer under my roof. You live with the consequences." Fatima swallowed hard, her heart pounding, but there was no hesitation in her eyes. "I accept that, father. Because for once, I am living my truth." Ali stepped beside her, his hand firm on hers, and together they walked out of the mansion. Behind them, Begum Naila wept silently, while Mirza Akram sat motionless, a man torn between anger and loss. Months passed, and Ali and Fatima's new life began to blossom. Their small house, once bare and lifeless, now buzzed with activity. The scent of Fatima's baked goods often drifted through the air, luring neighbors to stop by. Children from nearby houses played in their yard, laughing as Fatima handed them leftover sweets. Ali's steady work in construction earned him respect among villagers who admired his honesty and determination. Yet despite their growing happiness, a shadow lingered in Fatima's heart, her father. Mirza Akram's angry words still rang in her ears, but so did the memory of the brief flicker of hurt in his eyes when she had walked away. She knew he loved her in his own way, even if that love had always been smothered by pride. One evening, as she was kneading dough, a knock came at the door. Ali opened it and found an elderly servant standing outside, one he recognized from Akram's mansion. The man bowed respectfully and handed over a folded letter. "From your father," he said softly, before leaving. Fatima's hands trembled as she unfolded the paper. The writing was firm, but the words carried a heaviness she had never seen before. "Daughter, if you still see me as your father, come with Ali and visit. I wish to speak, not as a master, but as a man who has realized his mistakes." Tears blurred Fatima's vision. Ali read the letter over her shoulder, then placed a steady hand on hers. It's your decision. Do you want to go? She nodded. Yes. I need closure. The next day, they traveled together. Entering the grand home again felt different this time. Fatima was no longer the frightened girl bound by lies. She was a woman who had built her own strength. In the sitting room, Mirza Akram rose to greet them. His face looked older, wearier. For a long moment, father and daughter simply stared at each other. Then Fatima broke the silence. Abba, her voice cracked, but she stood firm. I didn't come to fight. I came because I still love you. Akram's stern expression crumbled. His voice trembled as he said, and I came because I realized I nearly lost the only child Allah blessed me with. I forced you into a life of fear. I was wrong. Fatima's tears fell freely as she stepped forward and embraced him. The walls of pride that had stood for years finally collapsed. Begum Naila, standing nearby, wept quietly, whispering prayers of gratitude. Akram turned to Ali. I misjudged you, son. I thought you were after wealth, but you have given my daughter what I never could, freedom and dignity. For that, I owe you. Ali bowed his head respectfully. I never wanted your wealth, sir. I only wanted her happiness. From that day forward, reconciliation began. Akram offered them support, not as debt payment, but as a father's blessing. Ali and Fatima used the help wisely, expanding her small bakery into a shop and his construction skills into a small business. Years later, as they sat outside their home watching children play in the courtyard, Fatima whispered, We've come so far, Ali. From lies and chains to truth and peace, Ali smiled, his hand tightening around hers. Yes, because we faced it all together, and under the evening sky, they finally found what they had both longed for, a life not built on fear or control, but on honesty, resilience, and love.